Welcome back to That's Another Story podcast. I'm Lisa Andrews, your host, and today I've got a really interesting guest, Alice. Welcome, Alice.
Hello, thank you.
Alice. You have got a story and a half, I think, haven't we? Let's start at the beginning.
Yeah.
Let's just roll with it because this is new to me. I think you're going to educate a lot of people today, and that's what we want to do, don't we?
Yeah.
I mean, shall I just kick off with Alice? You had, do I say have?
Have.
Yeah, because it's something that you live with, isn't it?
Yeah.
An eating disorder.
Yeah.
Can you tell us, where did that start, Alice? What age? Can we start there and go through?
Yeah.
Through really the story.
Yeah, of course. So I was diagnosed with my eating disorder in my early 20s.
Right.
But it started obviously before that. That was just when I got the formal diagnosis. So it actually started when I was at university. It's one of those things that there's not really a definitive time when I can say this is when I got an eating disorder. It kind of, it starts off with something small and then it kind of grows, and it's just hard to pinpoint like an exact time.
You just said then, and excuse me if I'm ignorant to this.
No, that's fine.
You said you don't know exactly when the eating disorder. So this is a really difficult question I'm trying to word. Were you told it was an eating disorder, so then you knew, or did you think I have an issue with food? Does that make sense? I'm asking?
Yeah, of course. So it kind of started off with, like a typical diet. I was at university, typical university girl. In my first year, we were like partying, drinking, getting home at like 3 a.m. and making bowls of pasta, and we'd all be sitting around. And I got home from my first year of uni. Obviously, you come home for the summer, and I just kind of said, like, I need to have a bit of a detox. Like, I want to have some time away from alcohol, just get some healthier eating habits back in place. So I kind of went on like a bit of a summer diet, if you like. I don't like to call it that now because my relationship with like dieting and food and vocabulary around it has changed a lot over the years. But at the time I was like, it's like the summer crash diet that, that people want to follow.
Can I stop you and ask another question to bring us up to that? At this point, and I could be going completely off the track, were you wanting, or did you look at other girls and think, I want to look like that? Or is this completely nothing that went through your mind?
I think obviously like growing up, when I grew up, we were always bombarded with like magazines, and social media was just coming to light with like editing and all of that sort of stuff. So there was always that thing around me of like, you'd look at front covers of magazines and it would be models on the front, or it would be like photographs. My biggest thing is like, it was always like the photographs of celebrities on holiday looking bad, and that was always that thing of like, you shouldn't look like this, you should look like that.
Oh my god, I remember them pictures.
It was awful.
Like, look at her, she's got cellulite coming out
exactly
the water,
that. And I think because
girl.
For me, I'd always, growing up, been very aware of my body and very conscious of my body. So I think in the back of my mind, it was always something that I was aware of. And I think that's just the time that we grew up in. In terms of like what was presented to us. So I think it was more just at the time, I knew that I'd put on a little bit of weight myself. I was by no means overweight or, but I just didn't feel comfortable. It was bigger than I'd been when I started uni, it was just a little like, I just want to get back to how I was. But I think in the back of my mind there was that larger societal pressure to look a certain way and to have a certain type of body. So it just kind of started off like that. And then I remember going back to uni in the September, and everyone that had seen me leaving, we left around July time. All of my friends at uni obviously hadn't seen me over the summer, and I remember going back and them just being like, oh my god, you look amazing.
In 2 months?
In a couple of months. So, and I think, again, like as girls, you just kind of feed off of that a little bit. You're like, oh, like people have noticed that I look better. Like, and it kind of spurs you on, and you just want to carry on almost.
1,000,000%.
So I went back to uni, and like it was fine at that point. I wasn't in an eating disorder. I didn't have an eating disorder, but I was aware that like I didn't want to drink as much. I didn't want to eat as much. Like I was just very like, no, I'm gonna still go out and party, but I'm gonna make sure in between I'm a little bit healthier, because what I was doing in the first year wasn't healthy as much as my eating disorder wasn't healthy. How I was acting then wasn't healthy
just
either.
drinking,
there was
eating,
just no balance.
Yeah.
So I kind of went in with the mindset of like second year of like, I'm still going to party, obviously I'm at uni, but I want to make sure in between I'm being healthy, looking after myself. And it kind of just spiraled from there really. So by the Christmas, I was still very much aware and conscious of what I was eating. I joined the gym near to my house where I was living in uni, so I was going to the gym and just all of that sort of stuff. I was always a runner, so I was still running, I was going to the gym.
And was that just you, or did you have a partner in crime, another girl that...
No, it was just me.
It was you?
Yeah, it was just me. I used to go by myself. And then I remember doing going home for Christmas, so you always went home for Christmas as well, and I came back to uni in the January. And I told everyone that I was doing dry January. And obviously at uni, that's just like a swear word. It's like, yeah, you're going to come back and come to uni without drinking. Like, and obviously, especially the first couple of weeks back, it's like you always have like your mini freshers week. So it's always like a couple of weeks of everyone going out drinking. And I was like, well, I'm still going to come out, I'm just not going to drink.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Did you lose friends when you didn't want to be a party animal?
Not so much at uni, because I think I still went out, so I was still around those people, and like, you know, especially I was still going out, but the dry January, I think because it was like a short period of time, I still went out and I still did all the things, so nothing really happened in that time.
Not a massive change.
Yeah, but past that, which I'll come to, that's when it got more like obvious that people were treating me differently. So yeah, I remember the dry January happening, and the day of the end of dry Jan, I'd made a big thing like everyone's got to come out because I'm going to be drinking. So we had like a big night out, and I did drink and stuff, and then after that I was just kind of like, oh, I don't know if I really enjoyed that. And I think that wasn't me saying that. I think that was the start of these thoughts creeping in of like those negative connotations of like, oh, think of the calories in alcohol and all of that stuff. So I think at this point I was quite split. There was a big part of me that wanted to still be in the uni culture, but there was a part of me that was kind of on the other side now, where it was more of like a disordered voice in my head saying like, but she just really do
constant, Alice?
So as it got worse, it definitely grew. It was always then like I was always finding excuses to not eat or not drink or not take part. So I then did like Lent, and I'm not religious in any way, shape or form, but I was like, I'm going to do Lent and I'm going to give up carbs.
So you almost found an excuse.
Yes, because then it made it okay.
If anyone asked, you'd say,
I'm just doing it for
Lent,
or I'm just doing it for dry January. It's not me, it's like I'm just setting myself this challenge.
Do you think at this point people were noticing that you were doing this? Or do you think not yet?
Yeah, I don't think it was as obvious, because, this is something that I think is really, really important, and like the big part of the education around eating disorders. I still had a very healthy body at this point.
Okay.
And I find that when you live in a healthy body, if you're doing these things, people are like, admire you. They're like, wow, like I wish I had that willpower. I wish I could turn down chocolate, or I wish I could. So it's quite celebrated when you're in a healthy body.
Right. For education reasons, I'm thinking, do you think if somebody had noticed before you got to that point of looking like you were losing too much weight, do you think it could have been nipped in the bud, maybe? You know, if there are signs that mums, for instance, can think, okay, I know she's not, if I said to somebody, they'd think I was mad, but are there signs mums can look for?
Absolutely.
That might come later, but it's definitely a question I want to...
Yeah, no, absolutely, because I think that's where the education, like you say, comes into it, because spotting an eating disorder early and potentially, you know, giving someone support before they go through the weight loss and everything can save them sometimes their life, because obviously eating disorders are extremely deadly.
Yes.
It's not just about, you know, getting the perfect body.
No,
it's an illness. I think there's definitely things to look out for, and like I say, like especially around holidays and things where there's like Stoptober, Dry January, Lent, they're all really, really good ways to cover up any eating disorder.
That somebody with a disorder will cling on to.
Yeah, and it's actually something that I spoke about, like I quite often go onto my stories and speak about things, and the Lent that's just gone, it was something that I spoke about, like this would have been a prime time for my eating disorder to go, you can easily give up a whole load of food and no one can question you because you can say you're doing it for Lent. So it was something that like I speak up about, and I say, look, don't feel pressured to give something up. And me and my flatmate actually did the opposite, and we said we were going to do something for 40 days. So I think my flatmate said that she was going to go for a daily walk. And I can't even remember what my one was now, but it was like, we're going to do the opposite. We're not going to give up something. We're going to
do something,
add something to our life that's going to be positive, rather than avoiding a food group or a food or whatever. That's
opened my eyes, because I wouldn't have thought of that, but it makes sense that you jumped on any excuse.
Oh yeah, 100%.
For no one to be suspicious.
Yeah. So as I say, like when I was at uni, I decided to give up carbs for Lent. Which is just the worst thing that you can do. So I did the time, and everyone kept saying to me like, oh, what's the first thing you're going to eat after Lent's up? Like, what are you most looking forward to? And I remember at the time saying granola. Like, I just had this thing about like, oh, I just can't wait to eat a bowl of cereal.
Is that because you thought, or that's healthy?
Yeah, it was the healthiest carb.
Well,
like most people would have been like, oh, she's going to want like, a donut or a pizza or something. And I was like, oh, I just can't wait to eat my granola. Like, it was just very, very disordered at the time. But I remember getting to the last day of Lent, and everyone was like, oh my God, you can have your bowl of granola. And I was like, no, I'm just going to see how long I can do it for now. So I just turned it into another challenge. And it was like, oh, I've done 40 days. Like, I wonder how long I can keep this up for. And then...
Anyone at this point go, Alice, are you mad?
So I think because I was living at uni, it was so much easier for me to get away with it. Because I didn't live at home. No. My parents weren't around to see all of these things. But I do remember around that time... unrelated, I got a really bad sickness bug, and I was really, really poorly at uni. And I remember, I feel like even when you're older, like when you're ill, you just want to go home. And I remember ringing my mum and dad saying like, I really want to come home, because I really like, I just don't want to be in my uni flat, like I want to come home. So I had to actually leave it a couple of days because I couldn't come out of my like bedroom for long enough. And I remember standing at the top of my uni stairs, and my dad came to pick me up, and I remember his face when he saw me, and I think that was the first time when they were a bit like, maybe something's going on here, because I think that was, they had not seen me in a couple of, like, I could go like 3-4 weeks without seeing my parents sometimes when I was at uni.
And I'm guessing now you're shrinking.
Yeah, so I'd done the no carbs thing, so my energy was just on the floor, because that's what you need for energy. And obviously with dropping carbs, like weight loss does happen quite quickly, because I was restricting all my other food as well, so it wasn't just the carbs. I cut them out completely, but my food intake had dramatically dropped at that point. And then to add the sickness bug on top, I'd had a few days of like no food, so I think I just looked very unwell. And I think that was the first sort of time that my parents were a bit like, you know, like, is everything okay? That was the first time it got mentioned.
When they asked, is everything okay, did they mention, are you eating, or did they just...
No, it was more just like, is everything... And I don't think they really knew what eating disorders were. Like, before I had it, and before that my parents went through this like process with me, they didn't really understand what that meant.
As
like,
a lot of people.
And even myself, like, I'd never known anyone to have an eating disorder. I'd never thought I'd have one myself, so you just don't know about it until you're in it, and you have to learn about it.
Or have someone close to you.
Yeah, so I don't think I think they were just like, you know, like, the diet's gone far enough now, like, you look fine, you need to just
And maybe they just thought you're partying, you're not sleeping, which is what
you're at uni, you don't have a lot of money. Like they'd always say, like if you need money for food, like just ask. Like if it's money, then we can feed you. Like so, I don't really think at that point it was like, oh, you have an eating disorder. It was just the first time that they'd noticed that my body was changing quite a bit. So this was in the second year of uni, and I actually didn't get my diagnosis until nearly a year later.
And what does that look like?
So
talk us to...
I started to spend a lot more time at uni because going home would just elicit questions. The people that I lived with at uni had like mentioned a couple of things to me and were asking me if I was okay and if everything was fine, and I was just very much like, yes, it's fine.
You avoided going home because of maybe the questions or that someone would say, come on.
And then this is when I also like became very, very introverted and just not really sociable, because if I went out then people would ask me questions or people would comment, and I just didn't want to have the conversations. And at this point as well, I was becoming more obsessed with exercise, so any moment that I had, I was like, well, I want to be in the gym or running, I don't want to be socialising. And then at that time as well, I would just blame it on uni stress and like, oh, I've got loads of work to do, like I'm not coming out tonight, I'm just going to stay in my room and blah blah blah. So I don't know, being at uni I think made it very easy to
when
get
you're
away with
painting
things.
that picture, I think I'm going back to thinking when I was young, and we just let people get on and do what they want to do, don't we?
And I had a boyfriend at the time as well, and obviously he was very concerned, but it just, when he was around me I would just eat normally, and then so he'd come up and visit and I'd just eat normally.
So you would?
Yeah, because I knew that I could undo it when he went, because I wouldn't see him for a few weeks, so I'm like, that's fine.
So in front of certain people you would act completely, so they wouldn't really have a clue.
So it was only really the people at uni, but then I'd just say, oh, I've eaten already, or you know, there's so many ways to get around it.
So you become quite sneaky, don't you?
Oh,
and I mean that
very,
not in
very
a,
sneaky.
but
it's a very isolating like mental illness, and it's very, you become someone that like a lot of people don't recognise, and that's quite sad because you're lying to people that you love, like you are, but it's I always try and remind people, and now I think about it, like it wasn't Alice lying to them, it was my eating disorder. So we kind of had a thing where we, especially as I went through recovery, where we split the two, and it was like, I'm saying this as Alice or I'm saying this as my eating disorder, so we could really like separate the two,
the illness and you. You're at uni, Alice, and it's, for want of a better term, it's starting to get a little bit out of control. Who actually said enough?
So I went back to uni in the September, so that was third year, and at this point my boyfriend at the time was getting really, really concerned. We went on holiday, so that was kind of the first time that he'd seen me properly without like clothes on, just in a bikini and stuff, and I had posted pictures when I was away, and like people had commented, but I was still at this point a lot smaller than my normal self, but in a body that probably was perceived as like okay in society.
Were the comments, wow, you look amazing, or wow, you've lost weight?
It was still very positive at that point, and it was still very like, oh, you look so great. Especially because, you know, I was posting photos where I thought I looked the best. Obviously the people that saw me in person would see me at different angles where you could see that I was quite small, but I would post photos that obviously made me look a little bit better as such.
Yeah, of course.
So then I would say from the September to Christmas was when things got really, really bad, and I started to lose a lot more weight quite quickly. And then I remember going home for Christmas that year, and that's when my parents sat me down and were like, we think there's an actual problem here, like there's something going on.
Were you angry with them for pointing that out?
Yeah, and I was like, that's ridiculous, like you've seen me eat, I've been eating when I'm here, like I was very defensive. And then I went back to uni for the last like little bit, so this was the January in my third year, and things got really, really bad. I lost so much weight in a very short space of time.
Why was that? Do you mind me asking why, if it had been a gradual, why at this point now did it fall off?
I think it wasn't necessarily that I was losing more weight. It was probably just this is the point where I started to go from being healthy to underweight. So it was it was more noticeable, the weight loss that I was having now. And I was just becoming really, really unwell. I just, like, even in myself, like, my brain just wasn't working. Like, I was very forgetful and just everything. Like, that's when I started to get a lot of the symptoms of an eating disorder, like your hair falling out, my teeth were wobbly, and like just so many things that you don't really think about, all the internal stuff that I could feel, like I'd lost my period and all of those sorts of things. And I was actually in the gym and passed out. And
I was going to say, did you have energy for the gym?
No, not really, but I would force myself to do it. Yeah, it was quite bad. And I passed out in the gym, and then that's when I remember ringing my boyfriend in like hysterics at the time and just saying like, I think I need help.
Were you scared?
I feel like probably, but I don't remember. It's a really weird time because it's very like, you're very separated from yourself. It's a really weird kind of feeling of like, I don't want to get better, but I think I need to. So I think at that point, it was very much, I was still doing it for other people, and it was still very much like, I think I need to get better because, you know, like my relationship was breaking down and things like that, and I was like, oh, if I don't get better, I'm going to lose him. It wasn't for me at that point.
So you passed out at the gym, he came and got you, and where did he take you? What?
So I went to the doctors myself, and I just booked a doctor's appointment because I didn't really know where to go or what to do. And I remember walking in and saying, I think I've got a problem with my eating. They weighed me and I was too heavy for referral. So even though, so you have to have a BMI underneath a certain amount to be referred, and my BMI was heavier than that number. So she said, I can refer you, but nothing will happen because you're not unwell enough, essentially.
I need to just say wow at this point.
Yeah. I think this is the thing, the big misconception, and where the education is still lacking, in that an eating disorder is a mental illness, not a physical one. Did they send
you on your merry little way?
They sent me with some self-help folders, But it's quite interesting because I got weighed, and I don't like to talk about numbers just in case it triggers other people.
No, I get that.
But I was 0.1 over what I needed to be on the BMI scale. But I was also wearing like 4 layers of clothing at this point because I was just so cold. It was January. I had no fat.
Did the doctor know that?
Probably not, but she didn't ask.
But should she not have asked you to take your clothes off?
Yeah.
And look at you? And she didn't?
Yeah, I had like boots on, I had like tights, leggings, jeans on top, like 3 or 4 layers on the top, like because it was just, I was so cold at that point.
But she never
did any of that.
Did she do your heart? But did she do anything?
Not really.
Oh,
it was just kind of, I can refer you, but nothing will happen.
And there's a book.
Yeah, and I was...
Have a lovely day.
Yeah, and I was struggling with anorexia at that point, so not eating, over-exercising. And the only group in my area where I lived in London was a bulimia group. So she was like, I'm going to send you
Just for the viewers, bulimia is when you make yourself sick, am I right?
Yeah, so it's any form of like purging. So it could be like laxative use, it could be making yourself sick, any way of like kind of getting rid of what you eat. But that was the only group in my area, so they sent
But you weren't bulimic?
I weren't bulimic at that point, and I'd never had bulimia at that point. However, that's an important part of the story because in my head, I'd gone there still in denial that I was very unwell, but kind of, like, as I say, like getting better for other people. And I walked out of there and said, well, you guys are all lying to me, because I also had dysmorphia, so I didn't see myself as tiny as I was.
Can we talk about that, Alice, that dysmorphia? Because you hear that word a lot, and I just want to understand it myself as well. When somebody with dysmorphia looks in the mirror, I'm guessing, they see something completely different to
Yeah, so minute
talk
by
me
minute.
through that.
Yeah, like minute by minute, when I would look in the mirror, I could see a very different image. And I think that's what was always really confusing, especially for my parents, because I would 1 minute be crying because I'd be like, I'm so skinny, I can see the bones sticking out of me. And then 20 minutes later, I'd be getting ready to go out crying because I felt overweight and felt that I looked overweight. And
would you use the word fat?
Yeah.
Or would you say, I look fat?
Yeah, I'd say, look at this bit of fat, and I would literally be holding on to skin at that point. Like, there's nothing there. But in my head, I could see like that. I remember an image that I have, and I'd screenshotted it and sent it to someone, and I'd put a box around my hips, and I was like, I just don't understand why I'm so wide. And now when I look at that photo, I'm scarily thin, and I can see there is not one part of me that is wide. But in that moment when I sent that, I thought I was overweight and wide.
It must have been very difficult, and I'm not taking it away from you, but very difficult for the people that love you as well.
Yeah.
Because I've been through different experiences with my children, and I want to shake them and say, do you not, you know, so that must have been really hard for them to think, what is she seeing?
Yeah, I think mine and my parents will agree, our relationship went through the rocks when I was unwell, and a lot of anger and frustration that came from a place of love, but there was a lot of anger and frustration.
Am I allowed to ask who dealt with it better, mum or dad? Not that that's relevant, it's just me thinking...
It's kind of strange, because I think my mum went back into just this nurturing role, and she just wanted to be with me 24/7. But like I say, with an eating disorder, it's a very isolating illness, and I didn't want people around me 24/7.
Pushed everyone away.
So that was really hard to deal with. And then my dad, before he educated himself, and he will agree with me, he was very much just eat. I don't understand, just put a burger in your mouth and eat it. Like, what's so hard about that? So they both came at it from very different angles.
Yeah.
And to be honest, at the time, neither of them was right.
Yeah.
And I don't actually know if there was a right, because at that moment in time, I didn't really want people around me. Found it hard to have support because my illness was like there. It's like the illness in your voice is like the evil twin on your shoulder, and they're like, they're gonna ruin this, like, we're good together. It's almost like that safety blanket. My illness became my safety blanket. If someone was trying to strip that away from me or help me out of that, that voice would be like, well, what are you without me, almost. Like,
this brings me to ask a question, and this isn't just with eating disorders. I've asked people that do excessive drugs, that gamble. Is it a form of control?
Yes, 100%. 100%.
It is.
Yeah, it was. I think now when I look back at it, and especially now that I'm older and I've figured things out about myself, it was a way of dealing with like chaos. And for me, like, uni was a very different experience. I was living away. I'd never lived away from home before. I was in charge of like my whole life. I wanted to do well at uni, so I put a lot of pressure on myself, and I couldn't control any of that. I couldn't control what grade I got. Obviously I could work hard, but I essentially couldn't control what grade I got or where I was living or all of that. So for me, what went into my mouth and how I exercised were two things that I could have complete control over.
It was your shout, wasn't it?
Yeah. So, and I think just from like, I'm very like perfectionist in that way as well, and I had this idea that if I had this perfect body, then all the things that felt difficult around me would feel easier. If I looked a certain way. But obviously there was no perfect body, because even when I had the quote unquote perfect body, I didn't see it, and it didn't change anything. It was never about the body.
It was all about you controlling.
The control, yeah.
What happened then? So what was, if you don't mind me asking, what was the lowest point? How did you get there, and what was it?
So as I say, after that one, I was convinced that everyone around me was lying. I was still overweight because the doctor had told me, you're too heavy for referral. So my brain instantly went, you're fat.
And I bet you clung on to that, didn't you?
So I actually went, in the next 4 weeks, I lost even more weight, a hell of a lot of weight, and very, very quickly I just completely stopped eating, because at that point I was still eating certain things, but I just completely stopped eating.
Did you drink fluids? Did you?
Not really. It was very, very limited. I was taking a lot of laxatives daily as well, so I wasn't eating and I was taking laxatives.
Which I'm guessing, if there's nothing to come out, and
It's
I don't
really
mean
not great.
no,
It's obviously your inside
isn't
is
it?
really dangerous.
Yeah.
I was taking every single pill that they sold on the market, fat loss pills, carb
But there's
burners.
no fat loss to go. There's no
nothing.
food to come out.
So, in fact, like what I was putting into my body at that time was extremely dangerous, and I'm very lucky that I'm sitting here today with a
Yeah.
body that works.
Absolutely,
Still
yeah.
works well. But I went and I ended up losing a lot more weight, because at that point it was like a desperation thing of the only way they're going to help me is if I get myself small enough for help. So
Because that stayed with you, what that doctor
what
had
the
said.
doctor had said.
Yeah.
So it was about a month and a half later, I went back to the doctors and said, I need help, like I'm still struggling, I don't know what to do. They weighed me again.
Same
and,
doctor?
No, it was someone different.
Right.
They weighed me again and I wasn't allowed home. They didn't even send me home, they sent me straight to a local eating disorder unit. And they said that they needed to do like further assessment. So
What does this unit look like? What is?
so it's a unit in London near to where I lived, and it's just a specific. It's
And everyone
eating
there
disorder
has
unit.
either
Yeah.
anorexia,
Yeah,
bulimia,
any eating disorder. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I went there for tests. They, I remember going in and they had like an ECG monitor on me to measure my heart and everything else. And I
What
was
was that
saying,
looking like?
oh, it was awful. It was the first time my mum had seen me without a top on as well, and I never ever forget the look on her face because she didn't realise how bad it had got. But I remember laying on the bed and all of these doctors flooded into the room, and I was like just laying there like, I don't know what's going on. And then one of the lead doctors was like, oh, it's okay, it's fine, I understand. And it was basically because they couldn't find a heartbeat. So at that point my heart was so weak, an ECG monitor wasn't picking it up. And obviously they all rushed in because they were like, she doesn't have a heartbeat.
Yeah, where's her heart?
Like, it's just the thing that goes out. And then when the guy walked in and saw how small I was, he was like, it's under control, like it's fine, but
and
not
your
fine.
mum's having to watch this.
Yeah, my dad's outside watching all these doctors run into the room as well. So I stayed in the unit that day and they did a lot of tests. So they do like a really simple test, like when you stand up, your heart rate should increase, so your blood flows around your body, but mine was dropping. So it's why
When
like,
you stood
when
up.
I stood up, so my heart just didn't have the power to beat and like send the blood around my body, which is what makes you really nauseous and like dizzy and pass out. And so I had all of the tests done, and they actually wanted to keep me as an inpatient. And at that point, I said no. I didn't want to be an inpatient.
Why? Sorry,
I think it was at that time. I think it was a fear of if I'm in here, they're gonna make me eat.
I was just going to say that. Were you still at this point with low heart rate? Are you still thinking, can't stay here because they're force-feeding me, or I might put on weight? Is that still that's foremost in your mind?
100%. I was still very much like, I need to recover, but I didn't want to. I didn't want to be there. So I said to my mum that I didn't want to stay as an inpatient. So they wrote me a meal plan, and essentially you have to go back to being a baby. So you have to be weaned back onto food, because there's a thing called refeeding syndrome, and it's basically if I was to eat normally, it would have killed me, because your body doesn't know how to digest the food. It's not producing any of the right enzymes and things to digest the food.
So I can only like this to maybe, they say, don't they, with, I think, alcoholics, if you just stop dead drinking,
the same thing can happen.
So it's the same.
Because your body can't produce what it needs to digest the food.
It's got used to living like you've made your body.
And it's almost, I try and like, in terms of like making people understand, it's like giving sugar to a diabetic.
Get you.
So it would just cause
havoc.
an absolute
Yes.
havoc inside
Yeah.
your body. So I was like put on a meal plan that was like full fat milk, so you're pretty much a baby again.
You're a baby.
And then slowly you ideally reintroduce foods.
Did you go with that?
So I said to my mum, so they said to me if I didn't lose any more weight, I could be an outpatient. And then so the guy that did my assessment was like, you need to go and buy some blue milk, and today starts the recovery. And I was with my mum, and I was like, of course, like, yeah. And I remember coming out into the car park, and mum was like, should we go to the shop? And I was like, absolutely not. There's no way I'm drinking blue milk.
Wow.
Like, not a chance.
Mum.
You're not a chance.
And I mean poor you as well, but I'm just looking as a
my
mum.
mum thought that was the moment where I was
It
like,
was the answer.
I was
right?
gonna,
Where,
this is it, we're starting. And I was like, I'm not drinking blue milk, absolutely not. And then, really silly, I decided that I didn't want to live in London anymore. I wanted to move home. So I discharged myself from all the services and moved home, and then signed up with my doctor that in where I live. But it means you have to start the whole process again. So I wasn't able to just go back into hospital and be under care. I had to
go back to square one.
Go back to square one. So for a couple of months, my mum was like on the phone every day saying, I think my daughter's going to die if you don't help her, because at that point, they told
what
me.
What did day to day look like then? Just at
so
home?
They told me I had 2 weeks to live at that point. If I carried on doing what I was doing, I had 2 weeks left because my heart.
Did that resonate with you?
No.
Did that? No.
No. I was just like, oh, okay.
But
it
didn't make you think.
I think at that point your brain is so malnourished, like you don't think straight. So you're just not even really contemplating that. And
so how are you still here, Alice? What was the turning point?
Sometimes a miracle, I think.
Thank God you are, by the way.
So my mum was on the phone every day saying, you need to get her in, she needs to be in hospital, she needs to do something. They took me to A&E one night and tried to have me sectioned. My parents tried to have me sectioned because I was still losing weight at that point.
Yeah, and of course this is mental health as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you say they tried to, did nobody want to help at this point? Were they not looking at it like it was a mental illness? Or
not really, because I had to start the process again and I was being referred, but the waiting lists are just so long that didn't really mean anything. So they took me to A&E, as I say, but at that point I wasn't self-harming, and they consider self-harming either a harm to you or yourself in terms of like if you're cutting or anything like that. But my mum was like, she's starving herself, surely that's a form of self-harm.
Self-harming itself.
But because I wasn't harming myself or anyone else, and they didn't see it as an immediate danger, they couldn't section me. But I also had just completed my psychology degree, so I knew all the answers.
Question here. We're going back how many years?
This would have been about 9 years ago.
I'm hoping they've come further than that now.
Not really.
Oh
There's
my
still a
God.
lot of campaigns now to get rid of like scales and BMI in the eating disorder.
But to just relate, not just relate, but that because you're not cutting yourself or you're not self-harming, anything you do detrimental to your body, to yourself, drugs, alcohol, I believe, and I'm guessing that's right, that is a form of self-harm.
Yeah. But I was also, as I say, I just finished my psychology degree, and
now have you?
Yeah, so I finished my degree whilst I was unwell.
Whilst you were unwell. Wow, so you still managed.
Yeah, somehow.
Somehow.
Yeah, we don't really know how I made it to the end, but we did.
You made it.
It was ironic, but my dissertation was actually on eating disorders. So my mum was always saying, like, you're your own case study, that's why you managed to get through.
And you had an interest as well.
But I kind of knew what I needed to say to the psychiatrist because I'd studied it for 3 years around it. So my parents kept saying that to them, like, she knows the answers to say, like, she's not telling you the truth. And they were like, she's an adult, she's, you know,
you
mentally
were playing
well.
the system.
at
You
that
were
point
playing
because I
at
didn't
that
want
point,
to
weren't
be,
you? Yeah.
because I really didn't want to be impatient. I think I had a fear that if I was impatient, I would struggle to get out of it, because I'd heard stories of like people being in an inpatient unit and learning new behaviours from people that were in there. Things that didn't scare me might start to scare me, like certain foods that I was okay eating. If someone else was scared of eating it, I'd be like, well, if they're scared of eating it, maybe I should be.
Yeah.
So I just really didn't want to be an impatient at that point. So yeah, fast forward, finally managed to get into treatment, and I was a day patient, so I used to eat all my meals at hospital and have therapy, and then I'd sleep at home. So I had the best of both worlds.
At this point, you're eating your meals in hospital and coming home.
Mm-hmm.
Are you keeping your meals inside you?
When I could get rid of them, I would, but in hospital it was a lot harder because they monitor you and they go to the toilet with you. But even then, my parents were very much like, I remember my brother saying that we should take the toilet door off at home. He was like, we don't need a bathroom door, like, because they knew what I was doing.
Once you lock that door,
so it was still very much like when I was in between getting back into hospital, it was very much like I would eat but then get rid of it. But then when I got into hospital, it was kind of like, this is it now, like you don't have a choice. The services weren't great, the care was very, very hit and miss. I would often get sent home early and things because they didn't have enough people there.
Do you think, in general, because it's, and when I say you're doing it to yourself, I don't mean that in a flippant way, but the fact that it's your actions that are causing your body or you to be ill, do you think they disregard you a little bit?
I think it's a really hard one in terms of like, in the actual unit they don't, because they're very aware that it's a mental illness, but I think people around you
in life
struggle to contemplate that, because they're like, well, you're the one not eating.
Self-inflicted.
Yeah, and I think that was a big thing that I found difficult with recovery, and when people would say to me like, I'm so proud of you for going to get help, and I'd be like, I don't understand, like, I'm the one that's not eating, why are people proud of me? Like, I struggled to see it at the time as a mental illness and something that was out of my control, because it happened so quickly, so slowly, and like the eating disorder takes hold of you so slowly that you don't realise it's taken hold. So I still very much thought I was in control when I actually had zero control. Yeah. And that was what I found quite difficult. But actually, in terms of like the staff, they wouldn't treat it like that. They knew that it was a mental illness.
They knew that this is something that you can't control.
But I was the only patient at the time that I was in there that was a full-time day patient. So the afternoons when I was supposed to have lunch and dinner there, a lot of the times the dinner would get cancelled because I was the only patient. So because I was the only one, they wouldn't put the dinner on. So I would get sent home and told to have dinner at home, which obviously I didn't do.
You didn't do?
I wouldn't tell my parents because I wasn't allowed to drive.
Would you let your parents think you'd had your full...
Yeah, so I would walk from the hospital and I'd go for like a 3-hour walk.
That's
really so my parents thought I was still in
hospital, isn't it?
And then I'd wait outside the hospital, ring my dad and be like, oh, like, come pick me up now, finished. So my dad thinks I've been in hospital, the hospital think I've gone home.
The system really does let you down, doesn't it?
Yeah, massively.
When you look at things like this. And then, where did a turnaround come? Where was your point that... Did you save yourself, do you think?
So I met a couple of girls in hospital that I became very close with, and I'm still friends with one of them. One of them sadly passed away.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so she was 19 when she passed away. But I was with her in hospital for a couple of years before she passed away. And I think the three of us, there were 4 or 5 of us. 2 of the girls have passed away out of the 5 of us that were friends. Yeah.
Can I ask something on that?
Yeah.
Why do you think they did? Do you think they were too far? Do you think they were let down by the system?
They were let down by the system, massively.
Yeah.
One of the girls was discharged 2 weeks before she passed away.
Oh my gosh.
And then another girl, she'd had a heart attack previously from bulimia,
Right.
and then she had another heart attack which from bulimia, which was what killed her. But they were both very much.
Did that scare you?
Yeah, massively.
I'm not going to ask you to upset you because I'm sure that was absolutely traumatic. That's a waste of a question. But did that make you think, shit, this is what happens?
It was very much like, so before she passed away, we were all very close, and we would sit in hospital and we would talk about all the things we were going to do when we recovered. And that was a big part of our therapy as well. Like one of our therapy classes, or like parts of therapy, was like a scrapbook, which I still have now, that I made in hospital. And every week we would have a different topic, and you'd spend the week gathering things for your scrapbook.
So almost like your goals when you're better.
Yeah, so there was all sorts of things in there, like we'd do a scrapbook about like what job we wanted to do, holidays that we wanted to go on, and because like a lot of us, like, I wasn't allowed to fly because of my heart and things like that, so I've always wanted to travel. So I had a whole page on like traveling, all the countries that I wanted to visit, and you know, like meals that I wanted to eat, and you know, being able to enjoy the most simple things like ice cream with my niece, and like there were so many things
on everyday life, aren't you?
And like the job that I wanted to have when I was older, and there were so many things. So we kind of created that bubble of like, you know, if they're not going to help, or if we can't get full support from them, like we can support each other through this.
Each other.
So that was a huge factor in like pushing my recovery. But then like obviously losing people close to you and seeing.
Is that a bit of a wake up call? That
massively, because like my friend Holly that passed away, she was, you know, on the outside everyone else was doing better, and we were all like, she's gonna go back to college, she's gonna, you know, she was doing her driving lessons, she was gonna drive, and then getting that phone call
that she's
I just couldn't believe it.
Yeah,
I just couldn't believe
because
it.
Alice, you didn't want to die, did you?
No.
You weren't not eating or.
Yeah. No, I didn't want to die.
You didn't want to die.
No.
It was just something that had got hold of you.
Yeah, and I just couldn't see a life without my eating disorder. It was part of my personality and part of my identity. And then there was a real fear of, if I didn't have my eating disorder, like, who would I be? What would I do? Because a lot of my friends at that point had all like left college and gone and got jobs, or were doing their like masters or whatever they were doing. And I was just the girl, like, my life was going to hospital. So I was like, well, I don't have a job, I don't have anything. Like, what am I going to do?
Do you know, I'm going to, I don't know if this is relevant right now, but I wanted to ask you, because when I think of eating disorders or young girls that get eating, the first thing I think, I'm going to be really honest, someone told them they were fat. Or... Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or their mums forced them to eat all their dinner and they didn't want to, so that's how naively I think a lot of us think of that, but it isn't the case, is it?
No, and I think a lot of people as well, like when you think eating disorder, you instantly think of anorexia. That's the most common one.
Yeah.
And I think 9 times out of 10 people will say it's a young, pretty, blonde girl that wants to be skinny and thin and wants everyone to think she's beautiful. And I think that's still now, like, it's portrayed quite commonly like that, and it's so far from the truth, because one, I didn't want anyone to look at me. It wasn't for anyone else. It wasn't because I wanted attention or anything like that. And it's not glamorous in the slightest. And I think there's this misconception that it's like, oh, you know, you're all thin and petite and pretty. Like I mentioned earlier, like, my hair was falling out, my gums were bleeding, my gums were white, my skin was terrible, just everything about me, I was great. Like, I see photos of myself now, my skin was great. Like, there was nothing pretty about an eating disorder.
Alice, as I'm sitting talking to you, it's really funny, it's triggered a memory for me. And I had a best friend, her name was Lisa, and we were very, very close. And Lisa, I was always tiny, and I just mean, just naturally, not in a, and that's not, oh gosh, I'm so, you know, that was just my build. I was small for my age, And we were about 18. And I remember, now we're talking, she would come to mine, stay at mine, and she would turn up with bags of goodies. And she would give me them, and there would be my favourite sweets in there, and we had an amazing friendship. And she'd have her bag, so we'd have 2 separate bags.
Yeah.
And in her bag was lemons and oranges, and she just used to eat the skin.
Really?
Yeah, I know this is so random, but it's just triggered us talking. And I would look at her and say, don't you want some of my sweets? She said, oh no, I love. And then later we found out she was bulimic.
Yeah.
That's actually, and it's only now because I'm going back 30 years.
Yeah.
Longer than that even. It's just made me think, oh my God, my friend had that all them years ago.
And that, I think that's quite important because, like I say, like people think it's like, oh, you know, we want everyone to think, oh, look at us, we're doing this, we're doing that. Actually, like you say, like you at the time had no idea. That she was going through that. It's a very isolating and very, you know, it's very personal. It's a very internal thing.
And everyone deals with it differently.
Yeah, and it's horrible.
Where did life change? How did life change?
I think it's been an ongoing thing. There's no switch because I quite often get asked, when did you recover? And I don't think there's an answer for that. There's no one day when you wake up and you go, do you know what? I've had enough of this. I'm not going to do this anymore. Every day I have to choose recovery, and I think that's something that I'll live with forever.